Hey, what's up everyone? Today we are going to review the ASUS ProArt PZ13, and that is a 13-inch convertible for quite a specific target group of photographers, creators, illustrators and creatives that actually sports one of the new low-powered Snapdragon X Plus CPUs. But it could also be the perfect laptop for students if you're okay with the price tag. But let's talk about that.
This is Hubwood.
Now, the ASUS ProArt series is quite well known for good screens, high quality, and is clearly made for creatives. In the case of this convertible, ASUS tried to make it as mobile as possible while even being IP52 certified, meaning it can withstand humidity, dust, and water drops to some extent. They actually had people in mind that travel through regions with adverse conditions, like photographers that need to bring a good screen to even the harshest conditions. Its only available configuration sports the weakest Snapdragon X Plus X1P 42100 CPU with 8 cores and 8 threads up to 3.4 GHz, including an Adreno iGPU and a 45 TOPS NPU for AI workloads. Combined with 16 GB of soldered DDR5 8448 megatransfer RAM and a 1 TB M.2 SSD with decent reading and writing speeds of around 3 to 4 GB per second. A fantastic 13-inch 3K OLED display, a 70 Wh battery, the standard ASUS 65 Watt USB-C charger we've seen in products like the ROG Ally before, 2 cameras, one front, one back, and of course a copy of Windows 11. The price is 1,600 euros in Europe, 140,000 rupees in India and only $1,100 in the US at Best Buy, which is a huge difference and actually changes a lot in my opinion, since one of its competitors, the Microsoft Surface Pro, is usually more expensive with similar specs. And I don't understand how it can be that much cheaper in the US, to be honest. PS, apparently it also comes with an optional 3 months subscription of the Adobe Creative Cloud. Now, the build quality is really good overall, and I like how robust it feels. It has a sturdy metal case that can be protected with an included magnetic cover that can also be flipped open in various angles to serve as a stand. This cover comes in a green, grayish, army-like color scheme, probably not everybody's cup of tea. Also be aware that it doesn't fully cover the laptop, especially at the sides. The surface material of the keyboard almost feels like some kind of fake leather, and it's pretty good in deflecting fingerprints. Without the keyboard and the cover, it only weighs 876 grams. With the keyboard and the hull, it's slightly above 1.5 kg, and the small USB-C charger adds another 230 grams for a total of 1,760 grams if you bring all of it. And in its tablet form, it is only 9 mm high. Though with the keyboard and the hull, it is 1.7 centimeters thick. I also want to point out that for a 13-inch laptop, it's quite big due to it having the 16:10 aspect ratio. It has a detachable flat chiclet keyboard, and while I'm not a fan of such extremely flat ones, it actually worked surprisingly well for me from the start. And they even added a white illumination for the keys here, including the function keys at the top, which is nice. Be aware that since there is no hinge between the keyboard and the screen, using it on your lap can be a bit tricky and less comfortable than with regular laptops, while it is doable. Now, opening it with one hand is just impossible due to the nature of the device with its magnetic keyboard and cover. The touchpad feels very smooth and clicks nicely and easily. It has some gestures on the sides and at the top for adjusting the display brightness, the speaker volume, and also jump forward or backwards when watching videos.
This video, so let's pay for that real quick. This part of the video, it's directly video 1.
But despite the keyboard feeling stiff and firm, I've noticed that bending it a bit from below can actually cause the touchpad to actively execute a click. Now, the connections are quite Spartanic, to put it nicely. 2 USB-C Gen 4 ports and an SD card slot. And that's it. One of the USB-C slots and the SD card are hidden under a attached rubber band. So if you need to connect more peripherals, you'll definitely need to use a USB-C hub here. Also, you'll need one of the USB-C ports to charge the laptop, and in that case, it would be better if one of them was on the right side, so then people can actually choose which side they'll use for that. It is also usable as a tablet, as said before, when you detach the keyboard. And you can even use it for illustrations with the included pen here. I'm not an illustrator myself, but the pen quality and the pressure sensitivity seem to be really good, while it can be stored very firmly in this attached loop at the side if not in use. Though here is kind of in the way of the SD card slot and the second USB-C slot, while it is still possible to use these with the pen attached. The screen is clearly one of the highlights of the ASUS ProArt PZ13. It's a 60Hz OLED screen with a resolution of 2880 by 1800 pixels, which means it has an aspect ratio of 16:10. The maximum brightness I measured was 390 nits for SDR, and the color accuracy is really good with 100% for the sRGB, 94% for NTSC, 97% for Adobe RGB, and 100% for the P3 color space. It also supports VISA certified HDR True Black 500, and it is Pantone certified as well. And I also have to point out that the pre-calibrated state it came in was almost 100% on point. Calibrating it myself with the Spider X Pro had almost no outcome on the colors here. Also, OLEDs in general have good response times and great black values, and this is of course the case here as well. Since it's an OLED touchscreen, it's glossy, meaning you'll see fingerprints easily. Now, the runtime of the 70 Wh battery definitely is another highlight of the PZ13. On idle, with a display brightness of 20% and Wi-Fi activated, it lasted up to 27 hours. Watching YouTube full screen at 50% brightness and 20% loudness lasted an amazing 15 hours. And playing a game under full load resulted in 2.5 hours of battery runtime. Here the Snapdragon X Plus really shines with a good efficiency. Almost unthinkable battery runtimes just 1 to 2 years ago for a Windows machine. And what's great is that you don't have to tinker around with the battery settings or modes for the PZ13 to become efficient like on many other laptops. It just worked for me and often surprised me with how little battery was used due to my testing period. That also means this could actually be a great machine for students, since it will surely last a whole day at the university without charging it easily, if it's affordable for a student in the first place, of course. And the student thing is also true, since the PZ13 can be really quiet or even unhearable. Because the fan is absolutely unhearable when one is working on lighter tasks and office work, especially using the whisper mode or the standard mode, where it usually turns off completely. Only on continuous full load it becomes hearable, while I would still consider it acceptable. But in the end, it's only around 20 to 25 watt for the CPU that the cooling system has to manage. The CPU temperature stays at around 70 to 80 degrees after a few Cinebench R23 runs on standard mode, and even cooler on performance mode when the fan is running even faster. PS, ASUS claims the ProArt PZ13 will work even at extreme conditions like minus 30 degrees Celsius up to 70 degrees Celsius, which I didn't test myself for reasons. But I'm assuming that means even in very warm regions it will be able to cool down the device. Some thermal throttling should be expected in super hot areas though. On the full load the upper back gets a bit warm over here, but not hot. And you won't notice that, since the keyboard always stays at room temperature or the surrounding temperature anyhow, since nothing is happening below the keys. The MyAsus app lets you choose the performance modes, activate the battery conservation mode, update the device, and gives you a lot more options to individualize how the PZ13 behaves in certain conditions. Just a quick note, I haven't yet found a way to really test NPUs in a meaningful way for me, so I'm gonna skip on that part, to be honest, and the only thing I tried was this new co-creator feature in MSI Paint. And unfortunately, Copilot isn't fully working over here in Germany yet. The two speakers at the sides are actually okay. Not amazing, but for a 13-inch tablet, I think they're doing their job quite well enough. And the sound won't get distorted even on the maximum loudness. And this is what the integrated camera looks like and what the integrated microphone sounds like. And this is what it sounds like when I'm typing on the keyboard while recording. It also comes with a 12 megapixel camera at the back that you can use to take better pictures. And here's an example of that in good lighting conditions. Recent smartphones will probably have a better camera, but of course it's better than not having that option for a tablet device in my opinion. And here's a picture of our messy living room in bad lighting conditions after the kids have been around. The front camera also supports Windows Hello login, which worked perfectly fine for me. You have to be aware that since this is using an ARM-based Snapdragon CPU on Windows, you will not be able to use every software out there. It is, for example, possible to use Blender, Adobe Photoshop or Premiere Pro, while for Premiere Pro you cannot use the very latest version yet, but Adobe After Effects will not work at all. If you're unsure about the software compatibility, you'll definitely need to check that online before you buy. It will of course in general try to emulate software that wasn't specifically written for ARM CPUs, but that isn't always the case. The performance for daily use is absolutely on point. It's booting up within 22 seconds into Windows. Opening software and editing images works just fine, fast and fluid. Despite the CPU only reaching around 7,486 points for Cinebench R23 with its 8 cores in the multi-core test, due to the fact that it has to be emulated, hence losing performance, and only 1,089 points in the single-core test. In the standard mode, it still achieved 6,880 for the multi-core test. In Cinebench 2024, it scored 680 for the multi-core and only 107 points for the single-core test. In Geekbench 6.3, it scored up to 2,391 for the single-core and 11,258 for the multi-core score. And the PutChat benchmark for Adobe Premiere Pro version 23 resulted in 1,521 points. I also tried to actually work a bit in Premiere Pro with graded 4K footage, and in general that seemed fine, though it's just not as fluid as with a modern dedicated GPU on a workstation laptop or a desktop PC. But smooth playback was possible without stuttering even with graded material. Keep in mind that for this use case you will be definitely limited by the 16GB in bigger projects. I know this is not a gaming machine by any means, but the integrated Adreno X1-45 GPU is fast enough for some lighter gaming. I actually made a dedicated video with around 18 games tested on this very machine. You can watch that afterwards if you're interested. But for now, let's just have a quick look at 3 of these games on the ASUS ProArt PZ13. Remedy's control actually surprised me with the performance, even though it was at 800p in low settings. The frame times didn't look bad actually, and in most cases I saw an average of over 30 FPS, though sometimes it was dropping to the high 20s. But even fights were doable and the game is actually playable that way, in an old school console-like experience at least. Considering this is a low-powered tablet for creators, I think it's nice that it worked that well. I also want to point out that on such a small 13-inch screen, lower resolutions don't even look that bad. For The Witcher 3, for some reason, I was only able to run the new DirectX 12 Next Gen version, which usually doesn't run as good. But at least it worked. At 1080p with medium settings and FSR set to ultra performance, the game surely starts to look washed out, but that way I was able to maintain around 30 FPS or more. And considering I myself sometime played this game on an even weaker laptop back in the day, I would still consider it playable and enjoyable to some extent, just because it's worth it for the story and the quests. And last but not least, GTI 5 did not run as well as I thought it would. Around 30 to 40 FPS at 1080p and low settings. Playable, sure, but not optimal, and despite not being able to use the frametime graph, I noticed some stuttering here and there. Might be the emulation and the drivers again. In some cases the FPS were a bit higher, but I also saw short dips below 30 FPS in some areas
with more vegetation. And be aware, this was a single player game only, not GTA 5 Online, which is even a bit harsher on the hardware.
So overall, this seems to be a very good 13-inch convertible for creators that need to bring a portable device with a great screen and an amazing battery runtime. Considering the much cheaper price of the $1,100 for the US, the higher costs in Europe and India seem to be way off though. But then again, the competition in form of the Microsoft Surface Pro is quite a lot more expensive, usually when equipped with similar specs, but usually also not as sturdy and with a bit less battery time. But of course, prices change all the time. Though for $1,100, I would have no problem also recommending this for students even outside the creative range due to its silent operation, the battery and the good portability. But of course, 1 or 2 ports more would have been nice as well. And I don't know if it would have made sense for ASUS to wait for the newest AMD or Intel chips instead of using a Snapdragon X CPU after all, while of course it has good battery life. Don't forget to watch the gaming test of this laptop afterwards if you're interested. And if you liked the video, don't forget to like and/or subscribe to the channel. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye bye and tschüss.